Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Shushmita Basu Majumdar from the Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture, University of Calcutta. Today, in the course Indian Culture, in the subject Indian Polity, you will be learning with me Post-Mauryan Polity in Deccan. So now let's begin the course Post-Mauryan Polity in Deccan. So the learning objective here will be geographical region under the term Deccan, character of Deccan, chief features of post-Mauryan polity, secondary state formation and presence of localities in Deccan, land management and polity, and finally the powers which were there in Deccan, that's Shakas, Satavahanas and other minor powers. So let's begin with an introduction to what exactly is early historic Deccan. So early historic in Deccan was much later than what we have early historic in North India. In North India, we have early historic phase right from the 6th century BC. But in case of Deccan, we have this from around 3rd century BCE. Deccan in this early historic phase was a zone which roughly stretched from the Vindhyas to Krishna in the south and from the eastern to the western coasts. It gains visibility during the post-Mauryan times, exactly 200 BCE to 300 CE. This is what we mean by post-Mauryan. All the 16 Mahajanapadas in the list provided in the Jaina text Anguttara Nikaya, only one Mahajanapada is mentioned to have belonged to south of the Vindhyas, and this is the Asmaka Janapada with its political center at Bodhana. So during this time we had the references to 16 Mahajanapadas which were mostly in North India, and what we have mentioned till now is that only one Janapada or Mahajanapada has been mentioned in the list, which is from Deccan, which is the Asmaka Janapada. Now, what is important is there were other Janapadas as well. These are only Mahajanapadas or the larger units. But along with these Mahajanapadas, we also have the Janapadas or small principalities. The monarchical polity seems to have made its presence felt in the Deccan, which is mentioned as Dakshinapatha or Dakshinatya for the first time during the Mauryan period. So the penetration of the paramount political power of Magadha into Deccan can be seen right during the time of the Mauryans, and there are several Mauryan inscriptions which have been found from peninsular south up to Karnataka. According to Nilakantha Shastri, the Satavahanas emerged as a major power soon after the Mauryas or the Mauryan power declined. But this view has been challenged of late because when Nilakantha Shastri was working, most of the excavations had not taken place. But later on, when the excavations took place, then a very distinct pre-Satavahana phase has emerged, and now these recent excavations and other sources, especially numismatic sources, have brought to light a distinct pre-Satavahana phase. The emergence of monarchical polity in Deccan, though modelled on North Indian system, was a slow process. Pre-state communities like Bhojars, Andhras, Rathikas and Petanikas had existed within the Mauryan-controlled Deccan. This is evident from the 13th major rock edict of Ashoka, where all these powers have been mentioned as already existing in contemporary Deccan. The interaction of the region with Mauryas or extension of Mauryan rule had its strong impact on this particular region of Deccan, and it is due to this interaction that Deccan was actually passing into the phase of a monarchical polity. But here we also would like to know about the local powers which existed in Deccan. there has been a theory which has been put forth by Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay, and this is on the existence of localities and locality nuclei in Deccan. Let us now learn what are these localities and locality nuclei. This is a typical feature of the region, that there are presence of several small localities, and each locality had its distinct character and a ruler. So, these small localities again had a common base or a central locality nuclei. So, there were several localities, and on the several localities there was a central locality power which is known as the locality nuclei. And to demonstrate this particular thing, Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay uses a very important source, which is the Bhattiprolu relic casket. And this Bhattiprolu relic casket has been discovered from the site of Bhattiprolu in Andhra, which is in the eastern coast. And here we find a relic casket in which there is a very early Brahmi inscription. The inscription mentions about a ruler who has been mentioned as Pramukha or Pamukha of the clan or the Goshti. So he is the leader of a Goshti or a clan, and at the same time he also uses the term Rajan, that is, he is the king or the chief. So he is the king over several clans, and he is also the Pramukha for his own clan. And using this model, Chattopadhyay actually explains the theory of the existence of several localities. During the initial phase of the rise of the Satavahanas, these localities continued to exist. The most powerful of the localities was definitely P-10, from which which was ancient Pratisthana, and from this P-10 the Satavahanas actually emerged as a major power, or one of the major seats of Satavahana power was P-10. This process of acquiring localities can be clearly traced in Satavahana numismatic evidence. So when we look at the Satavahana coins, we find that these coins are regio-specific or locality-centric. So when you look at the coins of Nevasa, Kotlingala, P-10 Nevasa type, or when you look at the coins of Nasik, so you have a typical type from each region, and this is what is the existence of locality. So these coins were only for transaction in that small locality or region. So the Satavahanas were a major power who had under them the existence of several small political powers, and these political powers were minor chiefs like Kumaras and other powers who coexisted with the Satavahanas, and mostly they used the titles like Maharathis, Mahatalwars, Mahasenapati, etc. The localities issued their own coin types. The emergence of inscribed coinages was a further step towards the formation of the state society. So this is what we would like to harp upon in this particular topic, that the evidence which emerges from the numismatic sources is very important, and this helps us to understand the state formation process and the state society along with the economy of this region. Initially uninscribed and later inscribed ones with the names of their own local chiefs have been discovered. Subsequently, the local chief's name was replaced by the name of the Satavahana ruler as the sovereign authority issuing these coins. The reign of Gautamiputra Satakarni, which falls sometime around 106 CE to 130 CE, witnessed the termination of the issuance of locality or region specific coinage, and we find that there is a circulation of universal coin type all over the Satavahana Empire. Once again, I would like to reiterate that in the Satavahana Empire, we find the coexistence of local level coinage along with we find the universal coins circulating. So what exactly is a universal type? On the universal type of coinages, we find on the obverse an elephant mostly, and on the reverse we find the royal emblem of the Satavahanas, which was actually called the Ujjain symbol. It's 4 concentric circles with a cross. So the cross will have each circle at the end of the coinage, and this was the royal emblem of the Satavahanas. Now let us move to the topic of Dakshinapatha as a geopolitical entity. The Satavahana rulers assumed the epithet, that is Dakshinapathapati, which is the Lord of Deccan. From this we know that there was a distinct geopolitical entity of this region, that is Dakshinapatha. What exactly is Dakshinapatha? The region which lies beyond the Vindhyas to the south and up to the Krishna valley is actually the Dakshinapatha. Though their territorial control was not always and uniformly established throughout Deccan, Dakshinapatha was coterminous with Satavahana realm itself and was a geopolitical entity. So here you can see 2 coins which are displayed. On your left is the Ujjain symbol which I was talking about, 4 concentric circles with a cross, and to your right is the Western Kshatrapa coinage which was issued by Nahapana or the Shaharata dynasty. So here you find a thunderbolt symbol and an arrow. So these were the 2 major dynasties, and these 2 dynasties were engaged in conflict, prolonged conflict for a long time. So now let us learn a little about the Shaka power. Till now we had been talking about the Satavahanas, who were the major power in Deccan. But to the west of the Satavahanas, we find the Shakas also equally important and always engaged in contestation with the Satavahanas. The Shakas can be divided into 2 groups. The earlier group is known as the Shaharatas and the later group is known as the Kardamakas. The Shaka ruler of both the Shaharata and the Kardamaka houses were contemporary to the Satavahanas and ruled over western Deccan. They had a monarchical polity. These rulers usually assumed the title Kshatrapa. So sometimes we also find their title as Mahashatrapa. So the use of this particular term Maha, which is prefixed to the title of Kshatrapa, shows a kind of an elevated status. Similar thing can also be noticed in case of the ethnic groups like the Bhojakas and the Rathikas, who were the ethnic groups in the Deccan previous to the Satavahanas. In the pre-Satavahana phase, we find the existence of several small powers which we have already discussed, like the Bhojakas, Rathikas, Petanikas, Andhras, and particularly in case of the Bhojakas and the Rathikas, we find that their names have been apprehended with the term Maha as a prefix. So we find the terms Mahabhoja and Maharathi. So the term Maha being added actually reflects an elevated status of these ethnic autochthonous groups. Now, the similar case can also be seen in case of major powers like the Shakas. When they use the title Kshatrapa, then it is a lower status, whereas we find Rudradaman in 150 CE using an elevated title like Mahashatrapa. So this certainly speaks of his more exalted political position than an ordinary Kshatrapa. Satavahana rulers assumed grand epithets when they were compared in valor with several epic heroes. So in their inscriptions, we often find them compared to different epic heroes. Satavahana rulers embraced the Brahminical norms as the ideology of the state and performed Vedic sacrifices like Ashwamedha, Vajapeya and Rajasuya. This is further driven home by glorifying Gautamiputra Satakarni as a unique Brahmana, Eka Brahmana, who stopped the admixture among the 4 Varnas. So the ruler is actually claiming that he has stopped the Varna Shankara. So this is again very important position of a ruler both politically and socially. Upholding of the Brahminical ideology is also visible in the inscriptions of Shaka, that is Nahapan particularly. The predominance of Brahminical ideals in the ideology of the state is also visible in the political practices of the 4 generations of Ikshvaku rulers who controlled the eastern Deccan in the aftermath of Satavahanas for a century around 225 to 325 CE. So this continues even after the decline of the Satavahanas. As we have already learned a little about the conflict between the Shakas and the Satavahanas, which predominated the early historic phase in Deccan. So the early historic polity of Deccan was mainly marked by a major conflict between the 2 major dynasties, that of the Shahratas and the Kardamakas on one side and the Satavahanas on the other side. This political contestation is well discerned from the numismatic evidences. On the top, you can see a coin of Nahapana which has been overstruck by the Satavahana symbols, and particularly the device which has been adopted is from the coins of Gautamiputra Satakarni. This particular coin has been found from Jogalthembi hoard, and this Jogalthembi hoard has more than 13,000 coins, out of which 9,000 coins have been found as restruck, which or rather overstruck, so which actually delineates the long conflict, and as a result of this conflict, the victorious Satavahanas are now making a political statement through their numismatic evidence to actually mention that they are victorious over the Shahratas. And below you can see 2 coins with similar motifs on them, or the device of the obverse is very similar to each other on both the coins. Here you can see lions to left, and in front of the lion you have a standard, and this lion has manes, which actually is a typical lion found from the Junar region. And Junar was also a very prominent locality which was near the Naneghat Pass, and this region was extremely important. And we can see another very good example of political contestation in this region when the Shakas and the Satavahanas are using or issuing the same type of coin from the same region of Junar. So once the one power defeats the other and starts issuing the coinage. So we may presume that at Junar there was a locality power, and the locality chief may have issued the coins on behalf of the Satavahanas and also on behalf of the Shakas, or the Satavahana rulers and the Shaka rulers might have issued their own coinage, having the chief in the locality ruling there at Junar. But this also shows us that there was a contestation where the locality chiefs might have continuously changed their allegiance towards one power at one point of time and to other power at another. The Satavahanas and the Shakas also issued portrait type of coins, and Nahapana's coinage actually became a kind of a model for the Satavahanas, and they started issuing portrait type coins, which was again another way of showing their presence, political presence, as well as a political statement through their coinage. As we know that coins are peripatetic in nature and they can travel a lot, and that is why they are very useful as an advertisement medium. Now let us move into the topic of administration, which is again a very important part of polity. The burden of administration seems to have been entrusted to the Amatya, a high-ranking functionary. Some Amatyas could have been in charge of the regional level of administration in both the Satavahana and the Shaka realms. There were Sachivas or senior functionaries divided into 2, the counseling officers, that is the Mati Sachiva, and the executive officer, the Karma Sachiva. The Junagadh Prashasti of Rudradaman, which was issued in 150 CE, gives us the clue to the presence of this kind of Sachivas. If the Dharma Shastra evidence is considered, then the term Amatya, Mantrin and Sachiva had become nearly synonymous, denoting high-ranking functionaries, executive officers and ministers. The Mahamatra, known since the Mauryan times as an important officer, also figures at least in one Satavahana inscription. So we also get the reference to Mahamatras who have been found mentioned in the Ashokan inscriptions time and again. So this becomes a very important point, that the Mahamatras still continue in Deccan, and the politico-administrative elites includes Maharathis as well. The district-like unit of administration was known as Ahara, once again seen first in the Mauryan realm. The lowest tier of administration was village or grama, entrusted to the village headman, that is Gramika. Now let us move to civil and military functionaries and revenue administration. The maintenance of civil and military functionaries certainly depended mostly on agrarian resources. Diversified revenue demand seems to have taken a marker of the emergence of a complex monarchical polity. The realm collected levies on crafts, including cess on salt production, that is Lona Khadakam. And it is not only in the Satavahana inscriptions that we get Lona Khadakam or the similar terms of salt cess, but also in the later inscriptions of the Vakatakas, who were contemporary to the Guptas, we continuously get this kind of mention in their inscriptions. An inscription of Vashishtiputra Pulamavi mentions the levy Deya Meya, literally meaning something taxable was to be given and something to be measured. The Satavahanas for the first time introduced revenue-free grants of landed properties for religious donis, mostly Buddhist establishments. The Junagadh Prashasti throws light on the diversified revenue demands of the state. The treasury, that is the kosha of Rudradaman, overflowed with precious metals like gold, kanaka, silver, rajata, and gems by dint of his collection of lawfully levied taxes like rent on land, bali, share on agriculture produce, that is bhaga, and tolls and customs, that is shulka. The term bali and bhaga as revenue demands have been known since the time of Ashoka and were levied from peasants. The extraction of shulka or tolls and customs certainly speaks of the collection from commercial transactions. The combined testimony of Satavahana inscriptions and Junagadh Prashasti demonstrates that the administration mobilized resources from agrarian, manufacturing and commercial sectors. Junagadh inscription points to the possibility of the imposition of harsh and emergency revenues which could result in affliction or pain, that is pida, for the subjects. While Rudradaman is praised in the Prashasti for not having extracted resources by implementing these harsh taxes, the record highlights the possibility that such emergency revenue measures could be taken by a politico-administrative authority. Now let us move to the topic of land administration and documentation. So right from the Satavahana times, we find the presence of land grants which are recorded. Though we do not have copper plates like we have them in the later period, but there are several cave inscriptions which mention the grant of land. And definitely this gives us an implication that probably these were recorded on palm leaves or birch barks. So one counterpart is in the caves and the other would have been in the royal kosher where they were actually maintained. So there was a royal draft house or a keeper of records would have kept them together. As early as the 2nd century CE, the state apparatus in the western and central Deccan was already familiar with systematic and well-organized land documentation. Nasik inscriptions of Nahapana, datable to years 41, 42, 45, mention that land settlement and land granting records were duly maintained. Gautamiputra's Nasik inscriptions of the year 18 and 24 also mention similar record keeping or transfer of landed property. There are clear instances of not only recording the transfer of land but also keeping copies, that is Falakavare, of the same record at the town council, that is Nigama Sabha. Gautamiputra's Nasik grant of the year 24 repeats the term, that is Nibadho Nibadho. This has been taken by DC Sarkar as Nibadha Lekh, that is grant being registered in the Royal Archive. So it's not only a mere repetition but the mention of the keeping of this grant in the Royal Archive. Now let us move to another region, that is the connecting link between north and south, which can also be mentioned as a corridor, and this is the present region of Chhattisgarh. Chhattisgarh actually acted as a corridor just like Malwa corridor in Madhya Pradesh. An inscribed wooden pillar from Kirari has been found in Chhattisgarh, which can be dated to 2nd, 3rd century CE. It mentions a large number of officers who had assembled on the occasion of excavating a large tank under royal initiative, and this particular inscription, which is engraved on a wooden log, was actually on the pratishtha or the establishing of this particular tank, and on this day of establishment lot of officers were present, and among the officers are Nagara Rakhina, the officer in charge of security of the town, Senapati, a military commander, Pratihara, doorkeeper, Ganaka, accountant or astrologer, Bhandakarika, that is the person in charge of storehouse, Hastyaroha, the elephant rider or the elephant driver, Padamulika, foot soldier, Rathika, superintendent of chariots, Mahanasika, in charge of the royal kitchen, Hathivapa, officer in charge of elephants, Dhavaka, a runner, and Sogandhika, a perfumer, Gomandalika, in charge of cattle, Yanashala Yudhakarika, officer in charge of the depot of carriages or carts attached to the weaponry or armory, Avasarakakaraka, a functionary whose nature remains obscure, Lehakaraka, bearer or producer of documents and notifications, Mahasenani, a high-ranking military officer. So finally, the presence of all these officers point out towards a very structured monarchical polity. So this inscription is extremely important for understanding the kind of polity which was emerging due to the Mauryan contact with Deccan, as well as a self-explanatory process or a self-driven process through which the Deccan was actually undergoing a kind of a change, and a very organized monarchical polity was evolving. So let us now conclude what we have done till now. We have looked at the region of Deccan, that is south of the Vindhyas up to the Krishna river, and here we have tried to look at the polity of this region, and the process of monarchical state formation is much later. This is a monarchical polity, and the state formation process is the secondary state formation, which is different from North India. In North India, we have primary state formation, and as we have mentioned that the early historic phase in Deccan begins much later than what we have seen in North India. And we have also seen that the Mauryan contact had given a major impetus, and several things from Mauryan administration were adopted in Deccan. And along with this, we have also seen the locality nuclei and the localities which coexisted with the major power like the Satavahanas. So, using the Bhattiprolu relic casket, we have seen how Chattopadhyay actually explains the formation of several localities and a central locality nuclei on which is related to all the localities. Finally, we have also seen how agrarian resources and trade had also given an impetus to the state formation. And thank you for attending this EPG Pathshala class with me. For further information, log on to EPG Pathshala. Thank you.